call it paradigm, I think it wouldn't be too far off, the circular economy, and what that means and what that can do and how it can present us with opportunities to understand how we don't have to engage in endless extraction from the point of view of development. So with that, let me hand it over to Pauline, who will actually, I think, self-introduce and talk about it.
Thank you very much. I think perhaps if we each quickly introduce ourselves. So if I go first, I'm Dr. Pauline. Oh, thank you. I'm Dr. Pauline Deitz from the University of Hull in England, primarily here because I'm also president of the International Sustainable Development Research Society, which I will shortly say a few words about. But first hand over to my colleagues to introduce themselves.
I'm Roberta Salomone from the University of Messina, and I'm in the board of ISDRS and also involved in the Questing project that we are going to briefly present here.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Thomas Ramos from the University of Lisbon in Portugal. I'm also a member of this society, of the ISDRS, and I'm also a member of the board, so I'm a member of both the board of the society and co-chair of a specific topic group on sustainability assessment and indicators. So now I will talk about, after Roberta, circular economy and public sector mainly.
Let's move to the end so that I can see people that I'm talking to. Just a habit, I think, being a lecturer, I'm used to standing up, so I'll try it this way. I hope you can see the slide. So very briefly to introduce the society, which is the thing that connects the three of us. It's, as it says, an international society connecting primarily academics from many different countries, maybe 30 or 40 countries may be represented at our conferences. We present our work, exchange ideas. It's our goal to produce and disseminate and exchange knowledge about sustainable development. And the circular economy has become quite an important theme in this over the last few years. Our society is organised around 25 different groups that are associated with the different sustainable development goals. Please do visit our website, isdrs.org. You can sign up as a follower to receive our newsletter and so forth at no cost. If you'd like to become a member, we'd like that even more, but you're very welcome to follow us. On to the next slide. So what, sorry. To say briefly, we've been organising conferences since 1995. The society was started in the UK. It's already international. It's a stretch, but since 2005 we've moved the conferences around the world. And you know our butterfly up here map that we've been to Australia, we've been to Hong Kong, actually twice, South Africa. A couple of years ago we were pleased to have our first visit to Bogota in Latin America. We were in New York in 2011, very few colleagues, but given the size of the academic community and the amount of research that's going on in North America and its importance in the global economy, we're keen to have more in the last years, and I would say that the appreciation of the challenges in organisation. So that's enough about the society. To say a little bit about the circular economy, it's been defined in at least 114 different ways, so we needn't trouble ourselves with all of those, but what is key to those ideas that it is, as Victoria mentioned, approach to resource management. It's about conserving resources. As the European Commission definition says, it's an approach to resource management where the value of products, materials and resources is maintained in the economy for as long as possible and the generation of waste minimised. So for me, it's this approach to resources is key to the circular economy. All sorts of other ideas about how we might organise society may come along with that, but this is the thrust of the circular economy. The idea that's quite explicit, as you may know better than me, within the European Union policy documents about the circular economy, the purpose of it is to reduce carbon emissions. It's part of a low carbon economy. It's to promote resource security. So can we use the metals and so forth that we've already got circulating within the European economy, because this is coming from a European perspective, so we don't have to mine and import from other countries outside that may present political or economic challenges. It's also, the circular economy is said to be good for economic competitiveness and to create new jobs. But many of these ideas are really more assumptions, they're not proven. And one of the objects of the Cresting project that I'll be talking about is to kind of test exactly how sustainable is the circular economy, and to give you some more idea of the type of activities that it involves. You see this diagram here. I'm not sure how many of these 10 words beginning with R that you can read from where you're sitting. Some will be very familiar, like repair, refurbish, recycling. The key one at the top is refuse. Now, it does look a bit like refuse, and there's the possibility for confusion there, but it's refuse. It's withstand the pressure to be a consumer. Just make do with what you've got a bit longer, or share someone else's rather than feel like you have to buy a new one. So that's key point, perhaps. So just to reinforce, for a circular economy, it isn't just mopping up the waste that we're produced by our consumption and disposal practices. It's about thinking about the future, the whole life cycle of the product at the point where it's being designed. So it is about planning ahead. So you need to bring together the people at the design stages and at the end of life stages, so that the people designing a project and thinking about how it's going to be used understand the infrastructure available, what the options are for disposing of it at its end of life. There's immediately a complication there, of course, because things are designed and made in one place and sold all over the globe. So you don't actually know at the point when you're designing something what the available infrastructure will be for disposing. So there are some challenges to be overcome. There are also some more radical ideas that I've sort of alluded to tangentially. What's known as the sharing economy. So do we all need our own car, or could we just rent one for the hour that we might need it, or find some alternative to reduce consumption? So some people see the circular economy as part of it, because it does, and we might not agree on that. We've probably all got some sense that being sustainable means that we're balancing environmental, economic and social priorities. How to do that, which one might have to slightly take the lead in which circumstances, in how the balance might work out is bound to be different in different places and so forth. And unless the circular economy has been seen or is seen as being a tool by which many of the Sustainable Development Goals can help to be implemented. So just for a reminder here, the logo from the United Nations, and a list of maybe the key Sustainable Development Goals, such as, for example, responsible consumption and production. The circular economy is key to that, but maybe others as well, like decent work and economic growth, which I'll say a little bit more about later in the context of our project, or sustainable cities and communities. When I showed this slide a couple of days ago at the session we gave at the United Nations, people there were quite keen that even more Sustainable Development Goals would be added on. And I guess you could argue that many of them could be, because if we've got enough decent work and economic growth, then perhaps that's helping to reduce poverty as well. So the circular economy could have far-reaching impact. I would like to very briefly tell you about 3 pieces of research that I've been involved in over the years related to the circular economy. First one started before the term circular economy was really current. So, excuse me, we were talking about industrial symbiosis, which is an approach by which companies collaborate to share their resources or exchange one's byproducts becomes the inputs of another. And activities that are now fundamental to the circular economy, but as I say, until quite recently had a different name. And we were looking at how regulations might impact on that type of activity. Very briefly, I'll touch on the project looking at new and biodegradable plastics, and then finally the cresting project, which Roberta and Tosh will talk about as well. So this project, as I mentioned, is about looking at policies for implementing the circular economy, which is very much in the context of European Union policies. Circular economy might be new, but the waste regulations, environmental protection and so forth, of course, goes back to at least the 1970s. So we've got decades worth of regulations that have come and gone and, well, mostly come and added on to each other and adapted in various ways. And sometimes the case is made that the regulations themselves become a barrier to the circular economy. Certainly I think companies like to put forward this point of view, that when you define a material as waste, then a certain body of regulations come into effect. It has to be treated in a certain way, you've got to have a license to move it and deal with it, and so forth. So if you've called something a waste, then it gains a certain stigma. So I tries to take away this stigma to a certain extent, saying perhaps we can define residues as officially byproducts. It's something that was produced incidentally, you don't need to call it a waste. Other things, of course, we might well call a waste. But perhaps when those waste materials have been processed in some way, we can say they've reached the end of waste. It can come out of that set of waste regulations and be treated like just another material. So the idea of this changed in practice was to simplify things, to increase the reuse of residues, let's say, as a general term. So the study we carried out was actually part of a much larger project with environmental scientists, biochemists and engineers who were working in the lab for processes to extract vanadium from steel slag. So slag is produced on the scale of billions of tons per year and is stored in large quantities around the globe from historic production. But it contains metals such as vanadium that have become increasingly in demand in recent years because of changes in technology. So they're useful in batteries or fuel cells and in the renewables industry. So there's a new demand for vanadium. There's actually not a huge shortage of vanadium, but most of it is produced in China. I think something like 90% of the global supply of vanadium at the moment comes from China. So it's on the EU's list of being a sort of medium security risk element. So if we could make more of the supply that we've already got sitting in these slag heaps in Europe, maybe that will be part of circular economy contributing resource security. So we carried out a case study using a rather large but anonymous integrated steelworks in the north of England that's been producing steel for more than 100 years. It's been through phases of private ownership, public ownership, back to private ownership, various private owners in recent years, and different practices for managing the slag, which at some times have been handled within the company, other times, more recently, have been outsourced to a private contractor, which turns out to be rather significant that the producing company no longer actually owns its own residues. They're taken by another company, but they're not taken very far. They're actually stored on the same site. So they share the environmental liability for the maintaining of these slag heaps. If some irritating scientists came in with an approach to disturbing the slag heaps to extract the vanadium, these companies would share the responsibility for increased dust emissions, for example, of potentially toxic elements coming out in the leachate, which they're required to monitor. So they weren't quite as welcoming as we might have hoped to the idea that here's a way you can extract something valuable from your slag heap, because all their efforts were being put into keeping this slag heap just safe and sitting there and not producing any products of any kind. Oh, sorry, I don't know what happened. Well, I know what happened, but I'm not sure why.
Do you want the keyboard? It's easier.
Thank you. I think what I might do is I've struggled with this story to tell you enough of the data so that you believe my conclusions, but without going into so much detail that we get lost in the stories. But I think I might.
So we need just give this.
Okay, thank you. So to be as brief as I can, In terms of the scientific part of the study, the technology's reached a stage where it's sort of almost ready to be scaled up to field trials. So it's almost viable. It's not commercially viable. Of course, the company's interest, unsurprisingly, is in commercial viability. As I've just been describing, they're very much prioritising their environmental requirements from the environmental permits, the IPPC directive, and a whole slew of environmental liability directive. There's a long list of regulations that are summed up in the UK context in their environmental permit. They have to use the best available technique for each part of their operation. Best available technique covers not just the production processes, but also the storing of the slag. It doesn't say anything in that back guidance about how you might extract vanadium. So that's not something that they're allowed to do at the moment. And the idea of changing their environmental permit they saw as being a huge hurdle. They very carefully avoid using the term waste for the slag. They will talk about residues. In fact, at the point where we were doing this project, the companies were lobbying to have steel slag to be recognised as a byproduct. Iron slag is a byproduct because it can go more or less straight from its production into being used as a road aggregate or something along those lines. Steel slag has to weather for 6 months to stabilise, and because of this 6-month weathering process, it's defined as a waste by the EU. As I say, the companies were very nervous about any idea of disturbing these slag heaps at the point where they were trying to argue it was environmentally stable and could be seen as a byproduct, but that didn't turn out to be the case. Oh, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, at this point, in fact, the producer doesn't own its own slag and therefore doesn't own the vanadium anymore. There's a long-term contract to another company who takes the slag. When there's a market for it, they turn it into road aggregate. When there isn't, they store it. So that company doesn't have a great interest in doing anything else with the slag other than what they are doing. Their business model is around using it as a bulk material, not as a source of a potentially more valuable but low volume material. So to try to sum that up, what recommendations I would offer, you can have a look at this note that appeared on the Europa website as part of the Science for Environmental Policy series. I would summarise that by saying that regulations that hope to promote the circular economy need to be very explicitly addressing that. At the moment, the Waste Framework Directive talks about encouragement to aim at the top of the waste hierarchy in your disposal practices. But encouragement is a fairly weak term compared to the penalties that the companies would face if they didn't meet their emissions criteria from the IPPC and other such directives. So the incentive to recover has to be made much stronger and measured more directly if that's what we need to happen. There are various complications here because of the amount of time span that's been involved while this slag heap has been building up. The changes in practice, the changes in ownership and the changes in regulations kind of accumulate upon each other. So it's a very complicated situation to unravel to get to the end that we might want, which is this valuable material. I won't dwell on that, but there is an open access publication if there's something in there that you feel may be of interest to you. So a project that has just started, and I'll be even more brief on this one, so it's funded by the British government as part of a series. It's become to everyone's attention that plastics is a problem. There's a problem of marine plastics, microplastics, large plastics. Plastics have become seen as a demon product, something that we need to avoid or certainly use in a different way. So they've made a certain amount of funding available to kickstart addressing this problem by building capacity for plastics research of different types at, as it happens, 8 universities, one of which is the University of Hull. So here's the aim of our project, to look for gaps and leaks in the plastics circular economy, essentially to make the plastics economy more circular than it is at the moment by a process of co-design, so working with different stakeholders. across a very wide interdisciplinary group. There's something like 20 different departments from the university represented in this project, and just one or two of those I'll highlight now. So we have a group of, I think, at least 20 different stakeholders who make, use, sell plastic in different ways, including some large supermarkets, for example, companies that distribute goods around the world. We've had discussions with them to understand what they need from plastic. Chemists are involved who are developing biodegradable plastics from bio sources. Now, the biodegradability of these plastics is much greater than the type of so-called biodegradable plastics you may have heard of that actually takes over 100 years to biodegrade. These can be designed to do so on the scale of days, weeks, or maybe months, depending on what you want. So we need to understand from the stakeholders what do they want. There are also chemical engineers involved who are looking at processes for depolymerizing or removing the toxic components from existing standard petrochemical plastics so that we can reuse that material for something else. There's certain types of plastics, for example, with flame retardants in that are very difficult to do anything with at the minute, but they are working on processes of removing the flame retardants to give us more options. Now, this project is at its very early stages, but one policy complication has come to life already when we talk to the stakeholders about these lovely biodegradable plastics that we're making, or plastics that are not recycled but have been stripped back to their basic elements and rebuilt into new plastics. And they say, well, that's fine, but there are regulations telling us we've got to use a certain proportion of post-consumer plastic in our new plastics. Do your biodegradable plastics count as post-consumer, or how does it fit into that picture? So this may be another example of a new regulation, very well-intentioned, coming into play that might in fact drive the continued use of petrochemical plastics, because the companies need a supply of recycled petrochemical plastics to put into their new ones. So there's some debate to be had there exactly how that policy should be framed. And maybe, fortunately, there is a consultation process going on in the UK at the moment around the waste and resource strategy. So this is part of that discussion. So, not before time, I've reached the Cresting project. Cresting, some of you will be well aware that the European Union likes to have acronyms for its project. This is ours. The full name is Circular Economy, Sustainability Implications and Guiding Progress. It's a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Innovative Training Network. So there is a network, and the relevance here to the ISDRS is that we identified each other, the supervisors involved in this project, through the ISDRS. We designed this project, which has got 15 different PhD studentships within it. It was advertised worldwide. Here's the older and the younger people within the network in our first workshop a few months ago in Hull. So the people hired to do the research on this project will come out of it after 3 years with a PhD and having been part of this fantastic network which funds them to go to conferences, networks, meetings, far more than ordinary PhD students funded. So it's a very generously funded type of project. You see here we've got universities in 8 different countries. There are also 13 different governmental, local, national, regional bodies, companies and so forth who are partners to the project. So the University of Hull, including me, are part of work package 4, which is trying to understand the spatial and social distribution of the benefits or potentially the disbenefits from the circular economy. So this is really trying to understand what the implications of moving towards a circular economy might be. So to just swiftly outline the 4 projects in that work package. The first one, Aidan Newsholm from Ireland, who's now based in Hull, is looking at whether a city, and using Hull as a case study, can take some economic development benefits from aiding in the development of circular practices by the companies located in and around those cities. Sounds like there's some potential there, but we have to remember that those companies, and many of them are international, they've got other branches in other places, they'll be trading globally. Possibly any financial advantages from being part of the circular economy may be distributed along that supply chain rather than actually providing benefits to Hull. Santiago Perez from Colombia is based at UTT in France. He is trying to build a collaboration with the local regional development agency, ID Alsace, looking at the processes involved in building a regional circular economy network using the Port of Strasbourg as his case study. Heather Rogers from Canada is using Hull and comparing to Lisbon with Thomas Ramos as her other supervisor to look at the implications for employment within a circular economy. So there have been many studies done that have estimated in various ways using different definitions of what a circular economy might be, what type of jobs might appear, what type of jobs might disappear. So we've got also wide-ranging numerical estimates of how many circular economy and jobs there could be. But what might the experience be in a particular place? How might the jobs that emerge match the skill set of the people in that town, using Hull and Lisbon as a case study? What would the experience of those jobs be? Will they be good jobs that people want to do? These types of questions have not been answered, so that's what we're hoping to address. And finally, Małgorzata Lekan from Poland is also based in Hull, and she's looking at what economists refer to as an alternative economic strategy. So there are charities based within Hull, one of which is partnering to this project, that collect food that supermarkets are about to throw away because it's approaching its sell-by date. They have to get it off their shelves. But there are families, there are actually quite a lot of families in Hull, who can't afford to feed themselves properly. So this organisation makes that food available to them for what they can afford to pay. So that is, in some sense, a circular activity. It's one that we might prefer wasn't necessary, but it's serving a useful function at the minute. How does that fit in with the sort of wider practice of the circular economy? To what extent the supermarkets organise themselves with the knowledge that someone will be able to use that food? And again, these are questions that we don't know the answers to yet, but we're working on. So to conclude briefly my section, that policy and practice around circular economy so far have been driven by environmental and economic considerations, with some assumption that there'll be social benefits, but we don't know who might actually benefit from those or where they might be. We hope that by exploring these social issues, we might be able to influence policy and how things may be organised in the future. We will see. And on the more technical side, because we need this understanding, we need solutions that will work for more than one part of the supply chain. We need to have multiple stakeholders working together. We need to be aware that regulations influence, certainly, well, they're designed to influence the way people behave. If you change the regulation, you're adding an extra regulation that creates complexities and uncertainties and may have conflicting interests between different stakeholders who we actually need to work together. So I think that would be it from me, just to say thank you very much for your attention, and I'm pleased to hand over to Roberta. Perhaps I will.
I'll put this in this side. Okay. Thank you very much for being here. I'm honored to be here and to present part of my research. In particular, I'm going to try to summarize the problem connected in measuring circular economy at company level. Circular economy has become relevant both in public policies and in business strategies. Indeed, in the circular economy vision, the transition to a take, make, use, waste, linear economy with its negative impact is seen to be a positive aspect, respect passing through a circular economy in which we expect to have positive impacts both in the environmental side and the economic growth. Pauline has already presented the definition, different definition of circular economy. I particularly like this definition of Kirker and others because this definition highlights the different key words of circular economy, reusing, recycling, recovery, and so on. And this definition also highlights that circular economy operates at micro, meso, and macro level. Indeed, there are three perspectives in the implementation of circular economy strategies. At the macro level, we refer mainly to a global and national system, and in particular, we refer to the promotion of sustainable production and consumption activities through the design and implementation of proper public policies. At the meso level, we mainly refer to industrial symbiosis initiative that also Pauline mentioned, and eco-industrial parks by encouraging networks for energy cascading, for sharing infrastructure, for exchanging byproducts. At the macro level, the focus is on product companies and consumers, and the aim is to reduce resource consumption, reduce pollution, reduce waste, design greener products, introduce new modes of consumption. Indeed, some authors also identify a fourth level of implementation of circular economy, the nano level at the lowest level of analysis, that is focused on single components and products, while at the macro level focus on companies and consumers. What we should say is that the implementation of circular economy strategy should be seen as a concurrent top-down and bottom-up strategies. So we obviously need policies, public policies, pushing circular economy, but we also need to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. We also need a transition driven by industries. But one of the main hot topic of circular economy research is how to measure this circular economy transition. How we can really understand how can we monitor the transition to a circular system. And indeed, the lack of a proper measurement toolkit and metric is a key barrier to the transition to a circular economy. In general, we have different metrics at different levels. At the macro level, metrics are mainly based on material flow analysis and try to measure and monitor this transition at city level or country level. Almost every city or region or country has a metric, but this metric is different in different countries. At meso level, metrics is mainly based on material flow analysis, again, substance flow analysis, life cycle assessment, supply chain analysis. At the macro level, we still have a chaotic situation because we really have different interpretation. We can say in general that we have a plethora of indicators at macro level and meso level, few attempts at the macro level, but these few attempts, I just presented here a brief overview of the literature. In these few attempts, we can highlight that there are no official and recognized indicators and methods, and there is still disagreement on many issues. For example, there is disagreement on the methods to be used for the measurement. Most of the authors suggest to use a single indicator because it's easy to communicate, it's easy to calculate, and it's easy to communicate. This, for example, is the sample of the metric suggested by the UL standard 3600. That is a single indicator with different perspectives, product, facility, and company. Other authors suggest that caution should be used in using a single indicator, because a single indicator is not able to describe the whole complexity of circular economy. And for this reason, they suggest tailored framework that try to integrate different indicators, try to integrate different methods. There is still disagreement also on the metric. Most of the indicators at company level are focused on physical flows, neglecting the economic dimension. Other authors suggest that we should use at company level metric based, focused on economic value. This on the theory that a company should first of all evaluate if there is a business convenience in this transition to a circular option. But others say that there is a risk in using only an economic value, that business will be tempted to choose in every case the most cheaper solution for them, and we are not sure that this is the most proper solution from an environmental point of view. And for this reason, these authors suggest to use a combination of different indicators. Mainly we find the example of a combination of the environmental dimension with the economic one, or the environmental with the social one. Some attempt to integrate the three dimensions of sustainability, economic, and social, environmental one, like for example the life cycle sustainability assessment method. Other suggest to use also a qualitative metric, like in this example. In this case, we have a point-based questionnaire that should be completed in order to obtain a score associated to a product or to a facility. There is still disagreement also on the object of measurement. What we should measure mainly at the macro level, the single product, or a company, an organization. Some of these indicators can be used to do both. For example, the material circularity indicator suggested by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation can be calculated at product level and also at company level as the sum of the single products that are manufactured by the company. What is certain is that the circular economy metric must have a broader perspective with respect to the focus on a single manufacturing phase. And so this is a suggestion to have a life cycle perspective when we are trying to implement this metric. There is disagreement also about the key elements, so the main characteristic that a circularity metric should satisfy. For example, I just inserted this example. these are the quality requirements that a circular economy metric should have, suggested by Linder and others. These are the 7 recommendations that should be followed when performing a circular economy measurement suggested by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. In this case, these authors suggest to a quality that should be satisfied is construct validity. That means just measure circularity. And just only measure circularity means that I have to calculate the fraction of new product that come from a used product. On the contrary, here they suggest to allow company to identify improvements, environmental improvement, economic improvement, social improvement, not circularity itself. So this is just an example of this disagreement. So, in summary, what we can say from this brief overview, that there is a lack of consensus about metrics and methods to be used in this kind of measurement, and this lack of consensus hinder the comparison among products, among companies, among sectors. In general, most of the examples that we found try to provide a first and rapid overview of circularity performance at product company level. So they prefer generally to measure circularity itself. And this circular metric doesn't allow company to have really a non-operative guidance on to company decision maker, and this is what really company needs. The main reflection that I want to point out at the beginning, I will try to point out also other reflection in my conclusion, is that probably the metric of circular economy shouldn't be limited only on measuring on a metric on closing slowly and narrowing circularity. We should not measure circularity itself alone, but we should be able to also to answer to other questions. For example, if that circular option imply a higher consumption of water, a higher consumption of energy, additional consumption of chemicals, additional transport activities. So if that circular option that we want to implement, which kind of impact this circular option has on the environment. So the main question that maybe the answer to this question could be done, could be given by a life cycle assessment study. A life cycle assessment is a standardized environmental assessment tool, and many authors, the benefits connected in using LCA as a circular metric is that LCA allow us to prioritize the different circular options. LCA allow us in particular to measure the potential environmental impacts connected to a specific circular option that we want to evaluate. And this allows us to compare then this circular option with other circular options or with the linear option. LCA allows us to add, we can add to a circular metric, a circular indicator, other LCA-based indicators that are scientifically based, that are well known, that are standardized. Indeed, LCA is an ISO standardized by an ISO standard, and we can also identify improvement, environmental improvement options connected to the product that we are studying, and maybe it could happen that this option not necessarily implies circularity. On the other side, some authors pointed out some criticalities in using life cycle assessment as circular economy metric. First of all, is that LCA requires an extensive amount of data. Not all the companies are aware of and wants to gather this extensive amount of data. It's time consuming, especially if we compare it with the other circular metric, is easier to be assessed. Its results require an expert audience, but companies prefer to have a simpler communication to be communicated to the market. They want to have a simple indicator that can be easily understood by consumers. Another criticality is that LCA allow us to identify the environmental impacts connected to the life cycle of a product, neglecting the economic and the social dimension. But what it is supposed, and what already has also said Pauline, is that circular economy is a way to make implement sustainability, sustainable development. And another criticality is that LCA doesn't tell us if a product is circular or not. It tells us which is the environmental performance of that product. So, in order to try to understand if these criticalities are real or not, if we can find solution, this is real, sorry, of course, if we can find solution to these criticalities, we are actually working according this idea. We are starting from previous LCA studies that we carried out in these years with different companies. We are trying to compare the LCA, the main LCA-based indicators, to at least, we are starting with this, but we will also widen our research, at least with these two main well-known circular indicators that are the material circularity indicator, that is the one suggested by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and the material reutilization score, that is one of the indicators, the main indicator, that is included in the C2C certification system. Here I will briefly present you two examples. One example refers to packaging materials and the other one to food waste. Regarding the packaging material, in particular, we refer to these companies that produce this olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, as have to decide which kind of bottle to be used, the glass one or the PET one. And we performed in 2013 an LCA study. That include also not only the primary packaging but also the secondary and the tertiary packaging. If we apply the material circularity indicator, so the first one, the material circularity indicator range from 0, that is a linear product, to 1, that is a circular product. And the MRAS range from 0 to 100. In both the cases that we calculated, as you can see, it seems that the most circular option is to use the glass bottle. But if we use LCA and, for example, we use the global warming potential impact category, the most the option with a lower environmental burden is the PET bottle. And this is also confirmed by the cumulative energy demand. We have chosen these two LCA-based indicators because it's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that suggests in case the company would add other indicators to use these two. So, as you can say, if I'm a company and I have to decide which circular option to put in practice, I have a trade-off. I don't know what to do. But it's supposed to that the circular metric is a tool for helping in the decision-making process. The other case is two different scenarios of treatment of food waste. In this case is a study that we published in 2017. We have different scenarios that has been compared in this article. In any case, here I'm going to present just these two scenarios. The anaerobic digestion of the food waste. The study was committed by a company that works in the AGDO companies that has higher amount of food waste daily, and so would like to know which is the better solution for food treatment. In this case, we compare the anaerobic digestion, in which that allow us to obtain biogas and compost, and the bioconversion process, that is another case that we studied with the LCA in a pilot plant, in which we are converting food waste by using Hermetia illucens, an insect, the black soldier fly. This allows to obtain dried larvae. Dried larvae could be used as a sort of protein to be used to produce feed, or as a sort of fat, of lipid to produce biodiesel. And in any case, we also obtain compost. What happened in this case when we started to try to understand how to calculate the two circular indicators? The material circularity indicator was not possible to be calculated because this is the famous, if you read the report of Ellen MacArthur Foundation, you will find this butterfly that is that describes the G different cycle in the different recycling process. The material circularity indicator can be calculated, or is intended to be calculated only for technical production, technical cycles. But in this case, we are in the biological cycle, so it was not possible to calculate it. Referring to the MRS, in this case, being food waste 100% recyclable and 100% recycled, in both cases, the indicator has the same number, is equal to 100. So it is not possible to decide which is the best solution. On the contrary, if we perform an LCA study, we can compare the two solutions, and we are trying to understand if we can also measure circularity. That it was one of the criticalities that I pointed out before. Indeed, in LCA, I suppose you are not LCA practitioner, but in LCA, is it possible to calculate the so-called avoided production? That means to integrate in the life cycle inventory as a credit of environmental burden the environmental data connected to the avoided production of the conventional product that we suppose to substitute with our recycled product. So this could be intended as a measure of circularity. But as I said, we are at the beginning of our analysis, so the bioconversion was the best one in this case. I would like to conclude my presentation with some reflection that could be further discussed at the end with you. First of all, we do not have to do confusion between measuring circularity and measuring the environmental performance of a product. If we just want to measure circularity and so measure the amount of new product that we obtain from a reused recycled product, I can use a circular metric. Most of the circular metrics that are proposed in literature. But if I want to understand which is the environmental impact connected to this circular option, I need to use other methods, other tools. For example, life cycle assessment. Another reflection is, but do we really want to measure and communicate only circularity itself? Do we really want that companies that are starting to do it, and they will probably, it will grow this activity, they generally communicate only circularity because it's easy to be understood by consumers. And companies want to sell on the market their environmental awareness. But what happens if that circular option, that is circular, is a more polluting option, is an unhealthy option respect to the previous one? The other reflection is that we think that LCA is a suitable metric to measure circularity because most of the criticalities that I very briefly pointed out before can be faced with a proper modeling of the goal and scope, of a proper modeling of the system boundaries of the study, of a proper modeling of the life cycle inventory of the study. And we can also add, is it true that life cycle assessment allow only to measure the environmental dimension, the environmental performance of a product? But there are other life cycle thinking tools that can be added in order to have a metric of the other dimension. So life cycle costing for the economic performance and social LCA for the social performances. So that's it. Thanks. Thank you.
So, finally, the start presented. Thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you very much for the invitation for this event. It's a pleasure, it's a great pleasure to be here and to share some of our ideas and thoughts regarding this topic of circular economy and sustainability and sustainable development. Now, in this presentation, I will show you and I will share with you a different angle. In fact, I think it's an angle with an high impact at policy level. So
I will try to show you some of the challenges that I think we should solve and answer and face to explore this angle of public sector and the link of and the role of public sector in circular economy. So in this presentation, I will try to show some of the ideas behind the current state and trends of circular economy at policy level and operational level in public sector organizations. So from the national level till the local administration. And I will show you in the second part of the presentation few examples, 2 or 3 examples of the Portuguese case at national level. So the policy, the policies and some of the practices that are being implemented there. So the presentation will be mainly divided in these 4 topics. So I will start with a brief introduction about the topic and the importance of analyzing public sector and circular economy. After that, I will present some of the current trends of circular economy policies and practices in public sector organizations. So what we already have, and what we should have. And a few examples about the Portuguese case, and finally, and I will conclude with some conclusions and some final remarks. So, regarding the introduction, so we already know this. We know that public sector organizations are the organizations that are under government control. That's quite clear. And we know that they develop very important public goods, public services. So the public service itself or themselves. So the political nature behind the public sector is the main thing that distinguishes this sector from the business sector. So that's the main thing that we should make clear from the beginning. So public sector organizations, so from the national level until the local level, provide services of public services, regulations, and political actions, and in fact they enable society to function. And because of this, they have a huge role, with a direct influence with different actors and different economic activities. So they are a supporter, of course, of circular economy, as we will see, and they also are a key player in this new thing of circular economy. And that's the angle that I want to show you and I want to share with you during this presentation. So they are huge. So this public sector, they have a huge size. So the organizations and the influence of public sector is quite significant. So we expect that these organizations, particularly at the national level, so the national public administration should lead the transition to sustainability in the business sector, in the public sector, and with NGOs, well, with everybody. And in fact, we expect that they will lead the transition to circular economy if we want to do this transition. And of course, again, the SDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals and the links with circular economy and with SDGs, if we want to link this circular economy and understand the impacts of the circularity in the SDGs, we need to understand the role that the public sector should play in this transition and in this link between the circular economy and the SDGs 2030. And an interesting point here is when we compare the private and the public sector, we know and we can easily identify that at the business sector or private sector, there is a relevant amount of work already out there. So we know that they are implementing things. Well, some are good, some are not so good, but they are doing things related with circular economy. But in fact, at public sector level, in general terms, I think we can say that they have been left out of the scope of these studies. In fact, they are doing things, public sector, they are producing guidelines and, well, nice documents and so on. But in fact, in the internal level, they think they don't have a role. So they think that they don't need to play a role in the public sector organization themselves at the internal level. So public sector organizations are following this private trend, but with slower signs. So, taking this into account, we know that there's a lack of knowledge about this challenge, about public sector and circular economy. And one of the things that we want to understand in the next steps for the future, and as I will show you in the next slides, we already start doing this. Researching and exploring these angles. So two of the things that we want to explore is how these changes, how this transition to circular economy are impacting their own performance, so the performance of public sector at national level, regional level, and local level, and how they are impacting business sector. And it's really important that we don't know. We have some ideas, but we don't have any concrete information. So related with the project that my colleagues already presented, with the Questing one, the one that is supported and funded by the European Commission, we will try to explore this public sector angle. So this work package will try to answer to this challenge. And in this work package the main aim, so it's to understand the role of public sector for circular economy in these three different lines. The first one is, and it's really important to understand, the state of the practices and tools that we already have in public sector organizations. So identify the initiatives and the approaches that are being adopted by public sector organizations. So at policy level, plans, and of course at operational activities inside the organizations, inside the public sector organizations. And the answer is for this, now we don't know. So one of the research projects of the PhD thesis, in fact, will be very much focused in this line here. And that is very much associated or interlinked with the impact in the business sector. So, because public sector has a major role producing guidelines and policies and so on, so they will have a real impact in the business sector in this transition. Finally, we'll try to, and this related with one of the talks that we just that was just presented by Roberta, we will try to explore how we can measure this, how we can assess this circular economy in public sector. And of course for business, they understand quite clear that they want to do that because they want to sell things. But in public sector, it's a different thing. They don't want to sell anything. So they think that, we can evaluate our performance, but we don't need to sell goods or services. So we are different. So the third line of the year will be to explore how to assess and report circular economy and sustainability in this public sector organization. So to achieve this, we have two persons that just started working 6 months ago, Natasha Klein from Switzerland and Enrique Trüger from Germany. They are doing the PhD thesis in these two topics, and we hope that until the end of the project, so in 2.5 years or 3, we'll have results with these two lines. Related very much with the topic of assessing, and I would like to zoom in this topic of how to assess and how to use the indicators to evaluate this transition to circular economy, and to include how to include circular economy indicators in the broad sustainability assessment that we already know. We should understand that these tools, these indicators that we can use to evaluate the performance are not so well established. We know that they are well, they are very popular. The indicators, well, everybody talks about sustainability indicators and so on, but we also know that they have some limitations. I will show you some of the things that we should think about when we talk about this specific part of the indicators to evaluate circular economy and sustainability. So they are popular among scientists and practitioners, that's clear. They are one of the approaches that most use it to do this kind of assessment. And so we think they support decision making, but we think that they are good to communicate with stakeholders, and they are good to synthesize information, and in fact in theory they can promote and support collaborative learning. But so that's why they are so popular, including to support the evaluation of the SDGs and implementation of the SDGs. So they are a fundamental tool, that's clear. So we think they are a well-established tool. For example, in this case, well, even in a not so familiar language like Malay, we understand quite well this sign here. Even with GDP that is not so consensual, we understand that is an indicator. However, as sustainability indicators are still an underexplored field of study, and we should take into account that there are some risks around this too. It's very popular, this sentence here, this statement, that we have an indicator factory. We have thousands of indicators, and sometimes we don't know what to do with thousands of indicators. We don't want thousands of indicators. That's one of the issues that I want to stress here. Because they are, in some cases, they are only useful for the scientists or for the people that develop the indicators. Nobody uses them. And in some cases, they are not. There is no consensus around the methodologies and the approaches behind them. So, in certain cases, they are ineffective in supporting decision making from national level to local level. And this is also clear until now. We have hundreds and thousands of indicators, and they are not being used by the target people. So related with this, we also know that, and we have very good examples out there about the decline in official data compared with the data that we receive in Facebook and other social media. So this is a huge problem here. Problem because it's changing everything, and if we have a new reality, we should have new answers to deal with this new reality. And indicators is struggling with this new reality, with Facebook, with Twitter, and so on. What to do with this? Because people trust more in Facebook than in indicators and in statistical official data. So this is one of the problems that we have. Thousands of signs. So the answer for this probably is, sometimes is, well, so in many cases we ignore the indicators and we don't care about them. So we should take this into account when talking about measuring and evaluating sustainability and measuring the transition to circular economy, measuring everything. We should take this into account, including at business sector, but also at public sector. And this presentation is mainly focused on public sector, now to evaluate the progress of governments in this transition to circular economy and so on. So I must confess that I like this slide to demonstrate the context that we have now. And we should face this, and we should respond to these problems that we have now. And the answer should be work and work and work, and improve, with the keyword. Stakeholders engagement should be keyword here. So collaborative learning, involvement of different actors, because one of the problems are very much related with the top-down approaches that the scientists and academics like Hazel, like me, produce nice indicators and nice papers and books, but sometimes the circular economy performance indicators or sustainability indicators, if you want in a more broad perspective. Who wants this? The business sector, the public, or I mean NGOs. We need to answer this before starting developing thousands and thousands of ecological footprints, carbon footprints. And what effective changes they are driving? What is the real impact of these performance measures? And I think it's one of the most important questions that we should answer before, again, developing more and more and more. And what related to social media, where this information should be provided. So the indicator in Facebook, in the official statistics, in the policy documents, in mail, newspapers, outdoor monitors, well, in public audiences. Well, probably we don't know the answer for this because we have another world. It's not the same world. And of course, to conclude these questions, all reliable or uncertainty when certain are perceived as sustainable indicators. This is crucial to deal with this context. So, after this reflection about the measuring and assessment of circular economy indicators and how to assess circular economy and sustainability, some of the things that we already know about circular economy in public sector. We know that the majority of the things and of the initiatives that are being implemented by national governments are very much related with sustainability in the broad sense. So public procurement, reporting, awards, sustainability awards, well, this kind of sustainability management systems, well, these kind of initiatives are out there. But the majority of these works do not have a specific focus on circular economy. And well, it's the reality. And we need to understand if they should have a specific focus on circular economy or not. So if we should recommend to the governments and national governments and regional governments to include this perspective, the circular economy perspective, or they should follow the traditional trend of sustainability-oriented things. Of course, there are some initiatives out there that focus specifically circular economy in public organizations like circular economy strategies to support public procurement, or, for example, a very well-known example, the digital government platforms. It's a good example of, well, circular economy at government level. So I think this is part of my central part of this presentation is to say that public sector should be an active player and of course a supporter of circular economy and sustainability, but should be in fact an active player, not only producing and developing guidance and policies, etc., but also looking at internal level how they are performing in their organization and so on in circular terms. So some examples of what is being implemented in Portugal, and of course in many other European countries, is quite similar to this examples that I will show you here, like in France or well, in many other countries we have similar initiatives. Well, in this case we have, like in the others, as I said, a national plan, and that's good. This is a good thing. So we have I think this is a good example of one more initiative from national economy and plan for circular economy in Portugal or in France or in Netherlands and etc. The plan is, well, it's nice. I mean, as well, covers almost everything. So it's related with circular economy, and I would say more than that, covering other things, more not so directly related with circular economy. And one of the problems related with this, I will show you in the next slide, is the confusion with other policy instruments at national level. So in this case, the plan includes everything. Is structured in two levels: the macro level and the meso and micro level. So with actions for the broad macro national level, and also for the regional and local administration and business. And so this kind of plan, if we want to understand and implement at the national level, I think, in my perspective, they are a bit complex. I mean, they are so complex to understand. Even for a scientist, they are not so clear when we talk about circular economy, because they are a bit blurred. Because they mix so many different things, so many new things, and they try to cover everything. So that's one of the aspects that I want to stress here. And the other thing is the confusion between, for example, at the European level, we have all the European Union members, all the European countries, they have a national sustainable development strategy. And part of those strategies are very much related with these circular economy plans. And we don't know how to play with these two tools that have so many connections and repetition. So a kind of overlapping risk and confusion between these instruments. In other cases, we have, for example, in some countries at the European level, I don't know, here in the US, national plans for green economy. Well, green economy, circular economy, oops, they are similar. So one more plan. Do we need one more plan? I mean, that's a question that we should reflect a bit. And of course, for these plans, you should be prior to the implementation. In fact, in Europe, it's a mandatory thing. You should have environmental, well, we call strategic environmental assessment, but is in fact a sustainability strategic assessment prior to the implementation. So to evaluate the impact of the plan before the implementation. And we should do this. It's mandatory. And the majority of these plans didn't have these evaluations. So, and to conclude, the related with the indicators, that they should have a strong monitoring scheme to evaluate the performance of the implementation of this kind of plan. And in fact, in the majority of them, those sets of indicators, they are, in general terms, weak. The other examples related, and also again in Portugal, but in other countries, is the kind of national web portal for circular economy. This is a very good thing. I think this is a fundamental thing. And in this kind of national web portals, they have lots of information related with circular economy, quite useful for business sector, for public sector, for the NGOs, etc. With concepts, strategies, guidelines, resources, data, including examples of good practices, including calls for and opportunities for funding, awards, and so on. So it's quite complete and quite useful. I think this should be a priority if we want to do a transition to this circular economy approach. This kind of support should be a fundamental thing. So there's some pictures from the website with information that you can filter and so on. I'm afraid it's in Portuguese. Some of you understand, but the majority probably not. But I can help you with that if you need. So finally, to conclude, the last example. The Portuguese Ministry of the Environment developed a funding scheme to support circular economy in business sector, but also in public sector. I have two examples here for public sector. This funding scheme the main aim of this funding scheme is to support circular economy initiatives at different levels, including at local level, for circular economy solutions for parish councils, for juntas de freguesia, and also to support circular economy public procurement activities at different levels of public administration. This is quite a positive example of doing things in public sector context. And that's it. And that's my final slide. So thank you very much for your presentation, for your attention.
Oh, did you want to do the Nanjing?
In seconds, so we have some time to discuss, but
Yeah.
we should have had a fourth presenter.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay.
Is this slide the main?
It is there,
I'll take
yeah,
it.
so you want me to put it on?
Yes, please,
Or
just
you want-
very quickly to show.
Okay.
Our colleague, Zhengwei Yuan, who's also part of the Cresting Project as it happens, and is doing a sterling job organising this year's ISDRS conference, which will be in Nanjing in China. Unfortunately, he hasn't been provided a visa to visit the US, so he can't be here to do this himself. So I cannot do justice to his presentation, but just to say that Nanjing looks a beautiful city, and I look forward to visiting it in June. Here is Professor Wang. He has a senior role in the environment faculty at the University of Nanjing. His research is much more on the environmental science side. Thank you. Now I feel like I should sing or something, but I won't. So geochemical phosphorus cycles, he's more into measuring and modelling on the environmental, so looking at air pollution and such like, a lot of work in industrial symbiosis. And the circular economy, which we must remember has been discussed and practiced in China for about 10 years before it became a fashionable term in the EU. So maybe you'd like to come to the conference in Nanjing. It looks extremely enticing. The university is extremely impressive. It's in the top 10 universities in China. It has 33,000 students and 5,000 doctoral students, 3,000 international students, and a couple of thousand faculty members as well. So it's a very large, impressive, well-rounded university. Oh, okay, I'm being asked to stop, so I will.
Not to take questions.
Yes, of course, but they are some of the impressive people who will come. Beautiful places to visit. I think maybe that's a nice background to leave.
So I thought before we kind of start the conversation and take your questions, I mean, I'm fascinated by all this, but I must say I'm not feeling too good about this because I know it's at the very start, but it sounds like a lot of this is just voluntary, that, you know, there's not this kind of, you know, agreement. We've got data problems. Everywhere you look, hearing all of this is that there's clearly a focus on these stakeholders, meaning, as I've heard it from you all today, certainly governments and policymakers, certainly academics and the research that you're doing, and then producers, I mean companies that are manufacturers of products. What about consumers in this equation? Are your students actually focusing at all on what our role is?
Actually, that is not something particularly within the Cresting Project. Heather, the student looking at employment, because she's decided to focus on employment in repair, she is taking an interest in whether consumers would have an interest in buying products that have been repaired. Would you take your product to enjoy a repair service, or would you be more inclined to throw it away? So that has become a bit more of an issue than was originally conceived. In fact, in the plastics project, we are addressing consumers, and we're using the staff of the University of Hull as an example of 3,000 consumers, because of course we all are as well at the same time as having other roles. So there will be a PhD project who is examining the attitude and the engagement of consumers. So you're right, that is a fundamental part of the equation. but there are many parts of the equation, and
Yeah,
that was
so
not
many.
one that we had.
Yes, but
Yeah.
I can say that indirectly we have the focus on consumers. For example, in the case that I presented, in searching for the most suitable metric to be used, we have in mind to have the consumer at the center and to give consumer the most proper measure of circularity. So we are trying to understand, to find a solution that is a balance between what companies want to do, that is communicate their circular awareness and their circular investments, but communicating the most proper information, that it's not only the circularity itself. And this means to make consumer aware also that it is not only that the measure that they have to focus on.
Yeah, you know, this issue of kind of the trustworthiness of the, whatever you come up with as the measurement, I mean, I'm an architect and I've used LCA tools in buildings because, you know, and they're very flawed, and they're, you know, you can get, I mean, of the Athena Eco Calculator or this one, totally different results. And one thing that interests me is how you can, what will it take to get people to agree on a common LCA methodology? Because
it exists
have
already.
one.
It exists already when we are talking about, for example, environmental label in the Europe, in the European dimension. We have it with, for example, a label.
Yes.
That is the green European label, but we have also with PEF, with APD. For example, APD, Environmental Product Declaration, are declarations that follow the commercialization of a product and that contains LCA results. In this case, in order to make comparable, the studies follow the same rules that are called product category rules and make it possible the comparison. Indeed, I know that the European Union is trying to understand if circularity could be inserted as an additional metric also in PEF, the product environmental footprint.
yeah, I'm interested also in then how you do scale that up, like the EPD certification to something like a building or a city, or, you know, when you know, have the scale. And this question about these metrics, how would, I mean, you would, Tomas, you would raise this question of scale with, you know, saying households could do this, you know, governments could do this. I mean, would it require, do you need a different instrument to do it at a smaller scale? Can people, I mean, you're talking about, in this case, this, essentially the performance, your operational performance, is that right? As a family or as an individual? So, I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, I haven't seen any, for example, you can go online and say, how many planets am I? Am I a 2-planet or 5-planet person? I haven't seen any kind of circular economy things for consumers, but maybe that's something that you could do.
Thank you very much for your comment, because in fact, in 2 days ago, we presented, you know, we mentioned that in Rio, and I presented a specific one, a specific talk on sustainability assessment indicators, so not only related with circular economy. And part of that presentation was very much centered on the topics that you just mentioned. So the community and households, community, and the role of the individual, each individual. And I stressed in that presentation that, in my perspective, well, of course we should maintain and you should have the official and formal data produced by the governments, well, by business sector, well, and so on. But the individual, in my perspective, will have a new role in the future. And I believe that with the technology that we already have, with the tools that we already have, in this changing world, the individual will be able to join this assessment in a different way. So collecting data, evaluating the data that they select, so analyzing, reporting at household level, at the community level. Of course, at the community level, we already have some things there, including US with excellent examples at community level. But I believe that each individual will have a different role, selecting what they want, collecting what they want, and analyzing what they want on top of the official information. So we'll have, in my perspective, I think we'll have two main branches of assessment. So the official one, or the formal one if you want, and the other one, so the informal, or the information collected, analyzed, and evaluated and reported by the individuals and the community. I believe the individual will be a kind of key piece in this story.
Yeah,
That's
no.
my understanding.
And I hope, I would think, yeah. I mean, so Pauline, you had mentioned that I'm very interested by this notion of the narrative of waste. That it's not waste, it's residues. And that's really, I mean, the discourse around waste, I think is very, very interesting. So what, in terms of, you know, how should we, I mean, so William McDonough, who is this architect who authored the Cradle to Cradle certification, he talks about, he has this equation, waste equals food, where, you know, the idea that nature, you know, all waste is food. How do you want us, as we leave today, when we go out, what should we say when we talk about waste?
Gosh, I do like the word residues. It's not my invention in any way. This is a response, thank you, to this directive that companies produce their product, which they make to sell. That's a large part of the problem, really, that things are made to sell. They're not made because people need them or they're particularly useful, but there's a market for them, and so there's a drive
Capitalism,
to
yay.
make more. Yes, we have it. But in the process of making the things that you're going to sell, you come up with some other stuff. So industrial symbiosis is all about what could we do with that stuff that might be used to make something else that we can sell, indeed. But these expressions, waste and byproduct, are used rather interchangeably. So I like the word residue because it could be either. It's not prejudging. It may be that there's already a use for it, that it could be called a byproduct. But these regulations are quite complicated. You can't say that this is a widget X made of material Z, therefore it's a byproduct. It has to have a market specifically at that moment, and it's got to go from where you are to someone else, and then it is officially a byproduct. Otherwise it would become a waste. Or it might have been through some process and ended being waste, but only if someone specifically wants it. So it's very contingent on the circumstances and will vary from place to place. So
Yeah, it seems so culturally determined as well. It's fascinating.
But
And
if
the
you
issue
want to
that you
use a sentence more communicative, you can say that waste is a resource.
That's a good idea. And I was also interested, the notion of toxicity that you raised is also with this question of residue. It's like, what is it? Is it toxic? You know, what do we do about that? I guess before kind of opening it to audience questions, gosh, I lost my thought right now. I had an idea of, well, it's really about this question of, I think, scarcity. Is there a way if you're trying to hurry this all up, and I know that, you know, you're just starting to work on this, it's going to be years in the making, but is it worth thinking about adding urgency by framing the scarcity of resources? Are you looking at the sort of the end of days, the end is near, whatever? Or, this idea that, if we don't really do something about this with climate change and coming natural disasters, this idea of, the waste in our environment is just going to intensify environmental degradation. Is there any thought in your world about this larger question of kind of scarcity and the people?
sorry.
No, not at all. People will really have to do this because there won't be those virgin materials that are available?
Eventually, but I'm not sure when, because I
Yeah.
think scarcity is politically and economically defined and
So true.
highly culturally contingent. So I love this idea that the EU is worried about the supply of vanadium because 90% of that comes from China. If Zheng Wei were here, he'd be rubbing his hands with
Yeah.
me. Whoa, there's no shortage of vanadium. So scarcity is not an absolute criteria. I mean, I've been around for some decades, and people have been worrying about the disappearance of fossil fuel for as long as I can remember, but there doesn't actually seem to be a shortage of it. We
Peak
now have
oil
other
didn't-
reasons.
Peak oil isn't really real, we think, right? No. Yeah, no, it's fascinating, this issue. Should we open it up for your questions and comments? I would love to hear what you all think.
I start?
Yes, please.
So, Stéphane Roux, I'm from the French Embassy. I think it's very interesting. I have one question it seems to me that the mayor from San Francisco said that the city would recycle, so I'm not sure of the numbers exactly, but my question will be here still valid, I think. They would recycle like 90% of the waste or residue, I don't know, from the city in 2020. I think they will miss it because they will do only 80% instead of 90%, I don't know. In the meantime, it seems, I know our numbers maybe not accurate, but that plastic pollution in the ocean that you can find, 80% of it comes from 10 big rivers in the world, which are in South Asia and Middle East, coming from all this region. So my question is that it seems to me that speaking about recycling economy is a rich problem. It's a problem of the rich. Mm-hmm. How do we deal with developing countries to get them involved? And because we won't solve the problem if only the rich take care of the problem. Yeah. So I don't know.
You want to say?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. So we sit here, whether it's in North America or in Europe, and we take certain things for granted, and that waste collection infrastructure is definitely part of it. And so we struggle with the plastic project. We're supposed to be sitting in Hull solving some small part of this problem, but we're not really addressing the global problem, because it's to do with poverty and institutional capacity and how governments organize themselves and globalization. So, goods, including plastic, have become very affordable, but maybe the collection and disposal infrastructure hasn't kept up with it. I don't know that I'm going to finish this sentence with an answer to that problem, but you're right, there is a much bigger problem out there than the ones that we are particularly grappling with.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I would like to add, we are from the European Association, and we work with the United Nations as a special consultative status with the Economic and Social Committee, and they were the guest of the UN a few days ago, as a matter of fact. I think the UN should be a platform for that. Mm-hmm. That's exactly why we had our representatives from European countries and China as well, which is a big contributor in both ways, in the matter and the United States, the matter of course, pollution, but also on the new technologies to try to solve this problem. And sharing it at the United Nations with Chris and his colleagues from Europe facilitated the ability of others around the world to understand how to approach this and how important it is to work together. So international organizations should be the answer, like the UN, and as well as European Union, African Union, all these international groups that work at the UN to spread the information on how to deal with this problem and how dangerous it is to be complacent with the consequences of it. So that could be one answer to address this issue on an international level, even for emerging countries, as considering part of a family, because with the UN, you don't have the old heritage, which is not precisely the best, especially for some of the countries involved. But if you look at it from the UN perspective, then it's a shared objective, and there could be a good possible approach to it, I guess.
And could I just add that one of the Cresting projects actually is looking at the leaking of waste from the EU, and particularly we'll focus on China and Nigeria, because this it's a sort of an unattended consequence of some of the sort of producer responsibility regulations. It's become quite expensive to dispose of electronic goods and old cars in Europe, and some of them mysteriously find their way to other parts of the world. So we're sort of exporting our problems, same way we've maybe exported pollution generation in an slightly earlier generation. So we will be trying to get a handle on what is happening in that situation.
Imagine if you had a global law saying you can't export your waste. I mean, no waste, any waste. Like, you know, e-waste you can't export. I don't know, nuclear waste you can't export. Then we would have a complete revolution. I think. Other questions, please.
And I have one more.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I was, because we are here in the US, what's your feeling regarding the dynamics that we have in Europe? So I'm talking about the rich. In Europe, comparing with the US in terms of the research which is done. That's one aspect of it. I'm following research and science and research here in the US. So in terms of, but also in terms of economic impact or whatever. But is there a lot of people being involved, interested? One thing. And what about advancing of policy or the way it's done here?
Not focusing on the research in particular, but in general, in talking about the societal awareness, I can say that circular economy is highly discussed in Europe.
Yeah.
At all
In Europe.
different in
Yes.
Europe, yeah. On the contrary, I think that in USA, in the society, is less known, is a concept less known, less discussed. And what this is what we perceive talking also these days with other colleagues that work in the field of sustainability research. That circular economy here in USA is something not new, it's something that is not discussed.
I actually agree with that. I think that, you know, we frame it very differently. I mean, we talk a lot about, you know, cradle to grave life cycle and then cradle to cradle.
Yeah.
But the circular economy isn't a well-known phrase. It's not used in some of the, you know, sort of certification systems that really do talk about life cycle assessment and these other, you know, things. So it's not a known kind of phrase. But, you know, it's also, I mean, we're definitely, it's a hot political topic because we're such a consumer society here, and increasingly in the rest of the world, you know, folks are following our bad example. But, you know, we're taught, of course, to consume because that's how we get out of economic fixes. And so, you know, it just, it's, you know, recession, buy, you know, buy. But, you know, it's starting to, one thing that is interesting to me, and I see we have people here that look like they're under 30. Are you listening to like the net zero waste influencers? Do you follow like the woman, and she is Californian, I don't think she's out of San Francisco, but, you know, the sort of, the social media idea of, you know, I have all my garbage for 1 year in this small jar. My students actually are really, you know, they're looking at that. They're saying, wow. But it's not mentioned in terms of, you know, circular economy or the idea of reduction, of refusing to purchase or, you know, composting or that kind of thing. But it's an interesting potential influencer of the young. I don't know, do you guys ever seen that? I'm looking at
The younger.
the younger ones of this around this table.
I can't say I have.
Okay.
So.
I-
Yeah, I think I've vaguely heard of it, but I work in technology, and so a lot more of the conversation around sustainability is less about like limiting consumption and more of investing in like startups and technology that are solving the problem in those ways. So those are more of the conversations that I follow, but that's really interesting.
I think the term circular economy has taken off in academia in Europe because of the policy. So it's brought it to attention to people who had no interest in waste under any name, but it's captured their imagination, and it's captured industry imagination as well. So some of the earlier concepts like industrial symbiosis, we mentioned a couple of times, industrial ecology that William McDonough has been around, that sort of concept. Those have been driven by American academics in recent decades, and now because circular economy has become so big in Europe and elsewhere, they're starting to bring that term on board as well. But if you look back a little bit, there is a difference in the North American literature and the European literature, because the European literature is more likely to be talking about policy. What can government do that might make this happen? What are the barriers to this policy being successful? Whereas Americans are less interested in the policy side, probably because there are fewer policies that are trying to make that happen. So they're looking more from a business perspective. What can companies do that they might make money out of being more sustainable? Of course, there's overlap, but I think it's not an unfair characterization of the two approaches.
Yeah, and we do have this in this country, there is this tradition among titans of industry for exactly this kind of thinking. I mean, the famous story of the most widely sold charcoal for grilling in America was a residue of Henry Ford, his production process for station wagons, where he took excess wood that he was using, because he actually lined cars with wood. It's a long story. Station wagons. And he converted that into, I think it's called Brickford brand charcoal. I don't know, if people grill in America, they know what that is. So there is, and the use of coal tar in pharmaceutical industries here. So we have this, again, industrial titans, this tradition of really thinking about products in this way, but it's not sort of framed up in this way that would be transformative in the way that your work is going to be. So there's a need. There's so much need for what you're doing. What else?
My name is Matthew Perry. I work here in the European Parliament's office upstairs. I'm not under 30, and that probably
You look at it.
Thank you very much. That probably informs my slightly jaded view of the world. I would be skeptical that influencers or any good examples are going to make a big difference to our behaviour, at least on the scale and within the time frame that we would need to, given the scale of the crisis. I think it would be much more effective to focus on financial incentives. In some countries, you can return used bottles to machines and supermarkets, and you get some cash, and you can go and spend it in the store. Wouldn't it be wonderful if that was possible on a much broader scale, that we were systematically incentivized to return products for reuse? And just kind of throwing ideas out there, wouldn't it be good maybe, I don't know, I'm sure there are pitfalls in practice with this idea, but reducing sales tax or VAT on services or kind of low carbon economic activity, and increasing it on high carbon or activities or good goods. I think that would be perhaps a more promising route to go down.
Yes, there certainly are debates around that. So how do you incentivize the circular economy? And in Britain, again, predating the name circular economy, but the landfill tax. So now it costs £100 to throw something away, essentially. Before you paid the fee to the landfill operator, £100 per tonne goes to the government. It started very low and it's gone up to that level, and companies have taken on board, and it has actually changed behaviour at the corporate scale and also sent a very strong signal to local authorities. Imagine you're disposing of 300,000 tonnes of waste of whichever type of ton that might be. That's going to be a lot of money paid in tax. So this has driven the sort of move towards recycling, and for companies as well, they've been open to more imaginative approaches, because just crashing something, putting it in the hole in the ground has become unaffordable. So there's definitely a role for financial instruments. And Heather, whose project is looking at jobs, is kind of examining this more economic aspect, because there's arguments that we need to tax activities that use resources, lower the tax on activities that are more labour intensive, in order to make sure that these jobs do appear. What the implications of that might be, well, is a sort of ... but because nothing ever kind of is self-contained in that way. But that's certainly it's a very good point. It's an object of study, let's say.
I have the honor to put some conclusions forward to the audience. So we've hosted this event. We are the European Parliament Liaison Office here in town, and obviously there needs to be some output from all of this. And one output could be to issue some policy recommendations that we potentially drew from what we've heard today. Obviously the discussion was very scientific, but it also brought me to a realization that we talk a lot about the new European Parliament that will be elected now on the 23rd to 26th of May, in terms of, you know, will it be more Eurosceptic, will it be more Euro-friendly, how will it be? But maybe we should also talk, will it be more environmental, will it be more science-based, will it be more friendly to the concept of circular economy? So all these are issues to be seen in the next European Parliament. And we saw that this concept of circular economy is obviously very important, but circularity by itself is not sufficient as a topic. It is important how that is linked to the SDGs, how it is linked to overall policy goals like the environment or well-being or even social. We heard it today. And there's obviously a very vivid debate in the academic community on indicators and methods to calculate circularity and other such measurements. So you can imagine that the debate is even more heterogeneous in the political domain, if in the scientific domain, where you think clear answers are easier to get, it is such a disputed issue. One last conclusion that I drew, and maybe the room might feel like that or not, but the truth of the scientific world, facts are not always what you may feel, as the example of the olive oil PET versus glass life cycle assessment is shown. And I do believe that it is very important that going forward also political gremium and forums such as the European Parliament take into consideration strict factfulness when they issue policy. So all these we took on board, and together with the other elements of your really great presentations today, we will pass forward to our political masters. And I would like to say that Radostina and I and everybody in the Liaison office really appreciated the debate today. We appreciate our colleagues from the member states who have been present in it, think tanks, staffers, etc. So we thank you all for being here today and giving us such a lively and full of content presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to just express my sincere gratitude of our organization, your association, the civil society in the United States. We are extremely grateful to the Parliament's office, Liaison office, because it shows exactly that they are the voice of the citizen, the institution that mostly represents us, and that with this case they give more energy to the Europe enthusiasts rather than Eurosceptics, proving that there is voice between citizens and institutions, which is at the base of giving further democratic legitimacy to the institution itself. So thank you again to the Liaison Office of the European Parliament for being so kind as to us, our fellow European Union and international professors, as well as us as citizens. Thank you.
It was our pleasure.
Could I just quickly add my thank you to you? It's been very kind of you, all the work that's gone into the background and having us here today, giving us this opportunity to speak. It's fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming.